Alright, so I tend to not really give too many warnings for a lot of these things. I expect most people to understand that the stories that I do off of this particular Reddit might not exactly contain the most cheery or happy or whatever of circumstances, so consider this your warning. I tend to not do a lot of the more screwed up stories for some good reasons, and those reasons might become apparent with this one. But at this point, I assume that if you haven't clicked off, then you are ready for what the story contains. So, without further ado, this is years ago, thankfully. The system, 3.5. The place, the Bible Belt of the United States. I had been an ST for a few people at a local game store for the World of Darkness, especially Vampire the Masquerade and some of the darker, grimmer parts of it. I had a player join a Sabbat game, and seemed to really like it. He wasn't a stellar player, but I pushed that aside as he was from D&D exclusively, and new systems can be hard to grok. He starts getting better and better as time goes on, finally getting the rules. It eventually came out that I had a boyfriend at the time, and the new player seemed shocked. "But you're so masculine! You don't seem gay at all." I get this a lot, or used to back when the societal standard of gay men were dainty flowers at best in media. I shrugged, and next game, the new player didn't show up. I figured that he was homophobic and just didn't want to come back to my table and cut my losses. 2 weeks later, he came back, kind of awkward, but apologized that he had been gone without warning. But some family stuff had come up. We had never traded messenger information, so this checked out to me. He was so sorry that he put my game into some strain, and even offered to help by inviting me to his place so we could do a game. His brother would run it, and he asked if I liked D&D, and I said it was cool, depending on the setting. We agreed on the time, directions were given, and it all seemed on the up and up. I was a forever ST at the time, and the idea of playing a game seemed cool. It was even going to be on a Sunday, a day in which I had no games. And that's how I was suckered into nearly losing my life. Something to know about where I lived: I was in the capital of a southern state, about 20 minutes from downtown. Nearby my house, if I drove 7 miles in pretty much any direction, I would run into a small town. The kind of small towns where you get confused for being a drug dealer if you're a man with hair that hangs below your ears. The kind of places that still had segregated radio stations. The kind of places that ran the Confederate flag above the American and state flags. This place was one of those small towns that had a church and a gun store across the street from each other. I was instantly on edge, but having grown up nearby, I just knew it wasn't the kind of place that I would like to live. But there was a game on the line. I'd also get to meet this cool family that I had heard so much about. Plus, I was used to Confederate flags everywhere as not a big warning, but more of just a sad fact. I got to the house, and there were enough cars, both working and non, that I had to park off the street. I walked up to the cozy 2-floor place and knocked. I'm admitted, and they began waving red flags at me like I was a bull and they were a matador. First, the brother, who we'll call Craig, offered me a bowl to put my car keys into so that we could all focus on the game and not the world around us. I refused because I had been to a game before that had turned into a swingers key party, and am not about that life. Craig said that it would be better for immersion. It's like being in a sensory deprivation chamber and you're just focused on the game. I said no again and pocketed my keys. Craig glowers at me and puts the bowl down. Second, I had been told that there would only be 4 players and the DM. There was also Karen, who was the girlfriend of the dude who invited me, Peter, and she was going to watch. I asked if she wanted to play instead, or maybe if she would just prefer to watch TV in another room, as I, personally, found sitting around and watching people play TTRPGs that I wasn't a part of boring. But Craig and Peter just smiled and said, "Nah, she won't miss this for anything." Third, they asked me to take off my shoes. This may not sound like a big deal, and was the only red flag I acquiesced to fully, or without complaint. I was confused when they put my shoes into a nearby closet, while everybody else's were by the door. But I was quickly told that they had a dog that liked to chew shoes, so I let it go. Fourth, they gave me a glass of red wine at my seat. Everyone else was drinking beer or scotch. I don't drink alcohol because one of my medications has an unfortunate side effect of giving me migraines if I drink it. But to be polite, I sipped it, and it tasted foul. I don't like the taste of alcohol in any capacity anyway, but this was a sharp, minty feel that I just didn't like. I didn't touch it again after my first sip. Fifth, in this homebrew world, the only deities allowed to be chosen from are from the Norse pantheon, and none of them are anything but good aligned, except for Loki, who was chaotic neutral. This was strange to me, as I don't view all the Norse gods as good in that pantheon, and I had been wanting to roll a cleric, but none of this had interested me. Sixth, they tried to get me to hand my phone over. Again, for immersion. I said no, and turned it off instead. This seemed to tick off Craig and Peter even more, and even Karen seemed to be a bit miffed. The other two weren't pleased, and one of them, who I'll call Ryan, even handed over his phone to show that it was no big deal. And I politely but curtly replied that I didn't have money for a replacement phone and would prefer nothing happen to it. Seventh, I was told not to go upstairs under any circumstances, as Craig and Peter's grandma, who had dementia, might get scared if she saw someone new. I thought that this was pretty strange, that they would state this and invite a total stranger over to their house, along with two other non-family members, if this was the case, especially if she could just walk downstairs. Eighth, I didn't notice this until I was going to the bathroom later, but there was a room with a few tarps in it, but no sign of paint or home renovation anywhere else. Ninth, and the final one, I was told that Craig and Peter's dad was a cop, and that he was a no-nonsense type about having his man cave, the basement, off limits as well. Which, whatever. I didn't want to go down to the basement or see some dude's man cave, so I only asked if he knew my cop friend, and then pointed out that the cop that I know was head of the internal investigations branch of the police. And I think that this is what saved me. So we finally started introducing characters as I'm rolling up mine. Peter was a paladin of Thor with a warhammer and a human. Ryan was a sorcerer who believed that Odin gave him his magic and was also a human. And then we have Weak Link, who was a rogue who followed Loki, also a human. And then we had myself. I had a half-orc cleric rolled, but had been told that this was a human-only world, and was having to re-roll and end up with a human cleric of Baldur, because I wanted to make a pun on Baldur's Gate. No one got it. The game started, and Karen, who was supposed to be watching and learning, was on her phone the entire time. iPhones were still the rage at this time, and I figured that she was just surfing the web or something. Craig continually tried to get me to drink more wine. In-game toasts, mentions of thirst, the heat of the sun. He got ticked when I didn't drink the wine, and Peter almost gave me a death glare when I asked for a bottle of water. Karen said that she would go get it, and is gone a very long time just to get a bottle of water. When she returned, the top was already unscrewed, and the seal was broken but reapplied. I noticed that there was some fine grit at the bottom, and just figured that this was a filter job in a dirty bottle. Karen grinned creepily at me and told me to drink up, but I didn't. I didn't want dirt in my body. The game kept going haphazardly, as if the DM was fumbling after the first two scenes. We ended up in a fight with some kind of ape creatures, which seemed strange to me as this was supposed to be Norse-inspired, and after a grueling combat session, I was realizing that this game was not for me. I asked where the bathroom was, and got told where the one I could go to was. And this is where I see red flag number 8 from earlier. As I'm in the bathroom contemplating how I'm going to break out of this without hurting any feelings, there's a weak, light knock. I figured that their dog had bumped into the door until it happened again, and I opened the door. Weak Link was standing at the door, looking down the hall like he was on lookout, and he whispered, "Hey, is it true that that cop is your family friend?" "Yeah? Why?" Would cop miss you if, anything happened to you?" Yeah, he's my godparent." "Why?" "You've got to get out of here." "Hey! Why's taking so long? Hey man, he's just taking a huge shit! Just wait!" "Peter's trying to get his red laces by killing a dandy, and he chose you. I don't want to go to jail, man." Now, for those, luckily, not in the know, red laces are a shoe code that means someone has murdered someone to earn them. Common enough in neo-Nazi circles. I knew what it was, but was a bit incredulous at first because I didn't want to believe it. I giggled a bit, so nervous and awkward that I wanted to play this off as a joke before Weak Link pressed his hand to my mouth and just motioned for the room deeper into the house and pointed. I like to think that I'm good in crises, and I was in this time too. I make it into the room and lock the door. I then bolted to the window and opened it. A screen was in there, and that's when I heard footsteps in the hall and the sound of flesh hitting flesh. Hard. A yell. Someone yelled, "Race traitor," and I just punched the screen as hard as I could and threw my fat ass out the window like an action hero. I hurt my wrist on the landing, but adrenaline was pumping, so I ran to my car, cracked the door open, and was driving off without even closing it. I raced home, checking to make sure that I wasn't being followed, or thinking I did. I was freaking out at this point, and was figuring any car headlights might just be them. I then went to my mother's house, because it was closer, and no one from the game shop knew where it was. I told my mother what had happened, and she thought I was joking until she noticed that my wrist was swollen, and I was pale and hyperventilating, as well as the fact that I had no shoes on. She called our mutual cop friend, and I told him about the father of Craig and Peter, as I knew their last name. And my godparent made a quick visit sometime around 4 in the morning. And it turns out that in the man cave, there was a shrine to the Third Reich, as well as several city codes being broken about cars being on the land. This entire thing was traumatic for me. So traumatic that I still won't go to anyone's house for an in-real-life game without knowing them extremely well, and still would prefer to game online. I still RP. I know TTRPGs don't breed this kind of behavior. This wasn't D&D's fault. This wasn't anyone's fault but theirs, as well as my own, for not being wise enough to notice all of these blatant red flags. And that's the story of how I left my shoes behind to save my behind. Alright, so that's it for the story itself, but I'm going to continue because in the comments the OP had actually continued the story with a little bit more information. So, someone had asked what happened to Weak Link. The OP had responded with, Weak Link was the 4th of the 5 arrested. He had been severely beaten and was caught trying to steal morphine from a free clinic that mainly served urban areas of the city. Once it was clear that he was going to be locked up for his attempted theft, and being an accomplice to attempted premeditated murder, he shut down and tried to get back in good with his friends. He wasn't let back in, and ended up being an ex-Nazi, with no Nazi protection in prison. It didn't end well for him. The ex-cop, or Karen. Ryan ended up trying to prove himself to some Nazi in prison by shanking another dude and was given life when the dude died. Craig tried to bite the cops who were taking him into prison, or something, and ended up in solitary confinement. and was constantly sent back to for other offenses which kept extending his sentence. Peter had supposedly found Jesus and had actually tried to write me letters from prison. I don't know what they were about. They were sent to the game store where we met each other, and when I was told about them, I just asked the store manager to do whatever he wished with them, because I have, and will always have no way to forgive him for what he did to me. And to continue even furthermore, another person had asked for more elaboration on Karen. Karen was given the lightest sentence, because of her gender and lack of previous history. Still, she had been found with meth and cocaine on her when she was arrested, but stated that she was just holding it for Peter. I was honestly the most scared that she was going to get out and then become some sort of martyr for the cause, or crusade against me. 2 weeks, I think, into her sentence, she ended up being beaten. Hard. By many people in her block because she had been hurling racial slurs at pictures of the children many of the mothers had. She never woke up, and she had a blood clot go to her heart. And in yet another comment still, the OP confirms that Weak Link and Karen are both deceased, as well as the wife, the mother of Craig and Peter, having been tossed under the bus by her husband. Also, for anyone wondering, no, the grandmother wasn't upstairs. She didn't exist. But that's it for this one. Seriously, folks, stay safe out there and use some common sense. If something's a little bit suspicious, probably better to be safe than sorry. This video might also unfortunately be removed from YouTube. If it does, I'm going to be putting it on my Patreon.